Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got not really a review, just kind of an overview of a prototype that I have here that is absolutely ridiculous. This is the Midgards Messer Odin's Toothpick prototype. Really appropriate name, I guess, assuming Odin must be enormous, like physically. I wouldn't know, I've never met him. Midgards Messer has always done absolutely ridiculous stuff in terms of folding knives. They are known for that. They are clearly having fun. I'm actually a huge fan of a lot of their much smaller, but definitely still absolutely ridiculous folding knives. And for people who like that overbuilt stuff and just enjoy it for the fun thing that it is, I do generally recommend that stuff. Not as daily practical cutting tools, but if you are an enthusiast and collector and you kind of enjoy the goofy side of this stuff, then yeah, definitely check them out. Tools for Gents has a ton of their stuff regularly in stock, so I will link them down in the description. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex and on TikTok at _metal_complex. And thanks for Tools for Gents. Thanks to Tools for Gents and Midgards Messer for sending this in. Now, I am not going to recommend that you seek this out to, to use it. This is a fun thing. This is a prototype. I'm going to talk about, all of the different aspects here, but this is not an object that I would recommend for what it looks like it is designed for. If you remember my video on the Max Ace Vortex here recently, which is a very similar idea. It's like a folding kukri machete thing, right? If you remember that, you'll know that I actually broke the steel liner lock on that. Using it in a way that it was definitely not intended to be used, but definitely in a way that people assume that it is supposed to be used. People like to kind of ignore whether or not there is any, hey, you should definitely use this or not use this for this. People tend to ignore that and just go, that looks like I should use it for this, so I'm going to go do it, right? I'm going to talk about that. I broke that knife batoning with it, and I kind of figured that it wouldn't make it through that, and there's a reason for it. I think these types of things, what's funny is they're actually pretty close to being capable of that type of stuff, but there are some things that need to change. I guess don't take this overview very seriously. This is kind of like for fun, right? And I know that people have been curious about this, so I really want to talk about it. Let's do some really quick specs. Overall length of this gigantic folder is 18 and a half inches long. Blade length is 8.75 inches, very close to 9 inches. The cutting edge is 8.5 inches. Normally, I don't do this type of measurement, but I'm going to go ahead and measure it in its closed position. It's almost 10 and a quarter in terms of the body. It's 10.35 if you add the enormous backspacer there. It doesn't really make sense to do some size comparisons. But I guess to put it into perspective, here it is up against the Cold Steel 8010. Here it is up against something like the Spyderco Shaman, the Spyderco PM2, right? And I don't know, what's another good one? Probably the Benchmade Grouptillion, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue. And how about the Ontario Rat Model 1? All of these knives are considered full-size knives generally. So this is obviously enormous. The materials on this knife, and a lot of people are going to go and look up the price. This is a prototype. To my knowledge, like a production version of this has not yet been released, but there was a listing on the Midgards Messer website that was crazy expensive, right? I don't know where that price tag came from. I think that was way out of line, and I honestly don't know what these will be. If they ever do release like a production version that ends up on the Midgards Messer website. But to this day, they have no listing for it. If you wanted my guess, bare minimum, this is going to be $350, probably well over 400. And do with that information what you will. I think that's probably too much money, but I think a lot of people are going to zero in On the blade steel, they're going to say, oh my gosh, that much money for CPM D2. It should be very obvious that the blade material, that kind of goes out. That kind of goes out the window. You know what I mean? I mean, if you made a serious folding kukri, you can't make it out of M390. That's the wrong blade material. What's the right blade material? I don't know. Probably not even CPM D2. You probably want something much tougher, right? We'll get back to that. I don't know if that I really want to cover too much about carrier profile. One of the funny elements I found on this knife is it has this like push button. Number one, it has a pocket clip. That's really funny. It's not going to fit in your pocket. Number two, the pocket clip is neat that it kind of nests into the frame. Again, this is a prototype, so the fit and finish on this guy is probably not perfectly indicative of what a production version would be. And I'm judging that based on the overall quality of the other Midgards Messer folding knives, which all tend to be pretty great, right? So it's a little bit goofy, but this, if you were to actually use it like a pocket clip, would bend out almost immediately. I mean, you can see here, this is pretty flimsy and not holding on to much. So I'm not sure what the goal was there. Again, try not to take it too seriously. It is ridiculously heavy. We have aluminum for the scales. Kind of cool, like legitimate, realistic texturing. I mean, it's great two-handed grip or one-handed grip, right? It definitely feels like something that's got a lot of weight in the blade, and if you were going to use it to chop, I think it would do that. And again, I'll come back to that. But we have huge steel liners, huge aluminum scales, huge aluminum backspacer, and an absolutely enormous CPM D2 blade. So if you're going to compare this, if you're going to strictly reduce it to materials, right? Let's say manufactured in China, think about how many, not regular D2, but CPM D2 blades, which regardless of your opinion on that, like the whole D2 thing, CPM D2 is substantially more expensive than regular D2. It just factually is, right? So if you think about how many blades are actually in this, how many standard blades, right? If we call a standard blade, where did it go? The Ontario Rat. Here's a regular D2 blade, not even a CPM D2 blade, right? Pretty large blade on the Ontario Rat 1. Not just how many of these blades would fit inside this one. And this is, again, if you're strictly going like value to materials, we have to consider the overall thickness, 275 thousandths. It's not just how many blades would fit this way, but you have to consider the thickness. You're talking about a ton of CPM D2 blades on a regular folding knife, right? Then you add in the total amount of aluminum and steel, even though those are basic materials, and you have basic materials multiplied. So while I still don't, totally agree with the final price tag on something like this, it's kind of hard to calculate like where the value is. I think the bigger argument here is how many people actually need this, right? Or be willing to pay for something like this. And I think the answer is not many. It's only going to be people who are like knife enthusiasts and are well aware of the absolute absurdity and unnecessary nature of this type of thing, right? Even talking about it spawns like a million different arguments. But I don't know that there's a whole lot more that needs to be said. We can weigh it. I don't know that my scale is actually going to allow us to see the proper weight on this thing, but we'll try. It weighs at least 2.38 ounces, putting it in the... I'm sorry, 2.38. 2 pounds, 3.8 ounces is what this is apparently coming in at, which is absolutely absurd. So the way that this locks out is with a huge liner lock, right? Yeah, that's the initial lockout. But on something like this, a lot of these Midgards Messer knives and these like overbuilt MagSafe knives, they come with these massive stop pins. This is the biggest secondary pin I have ever seen. This is substantially substantially larger than any other secondary stop pin. We're looking at, wow, that's huge, right? This is definitely meant to be engaged while you're using this, like, period. I don't think that Midgards Messer actually intends for people to use... I personally would not use this in any way, just with the liner lock. I would absolutely 100% engage the secondary pin. Now, testing the MagSafe Vortex, which again is insanely similar, right? This stop pin, and it's also backed up with secondary. There's a ton of threads. I'm sorry. This can't be super entertaining. This is backed up with secondary pins up here. You can see them they're attached to the blade and they kind of rest on either side of these massive steel liners. And then the secondary pin essentially makes the liner, it doesn't even matter, right? The problem with stuff like this, like, will it chop? Yeah, it will, right? If it's anything like the Max Ace Vortex, which again is built exactly the same way, could you go out and chop down like some light brush? 100%. You could absolutely do that. I don't think that there would be any sort of problem there. And the reason is because the impact is all going into the blade, which means this is moving backwards, and it's all going into the pivot, the secondary pin, and the external stops. So all of that is mitigated in a bunch of different zones. What we do not want is pressure going the other way. And of course, you see something like this with this insane lockout, and you're like, well, you have to baton with it. Obviously, it's made to baton. I think anything, even when it's built with these huge secondary pins, right? Any type of folding thing, if it relies on a liner or frame lock, there's going to be a problem there, and I'll tell you why. It's because even when that pin is engaged, the pressure, I'm going to move the liner out of the way so you can hear it. You know what that noise is? That's play, which means that when the lock bar is engaged, if you were to smack this on the spine, guess where all that pressure is going? Into this first, before it hits the secondary pin, the pivot, and moves the stops, the blade stops, into their other position and contacting the other side of the frame, like where they're nested, right? So with all of that pressure going initially into the liner lock, it's going to fail at its weakest point, which is the relief cut. That's exactly what happened with the Vortex, right? Now, again, I don't think that these are designed to baton with. There's going to be so many people going, the cold steel triad lock can baton. Yeah, I know, but nowhere on Midgards Master's site, nowhere on Tools, that does not say, please baton with this. It's definitely meant to do that, right? I understand the implication here. The main point that I want to make with this is these stops, like when you have these incredibly robust materials, right, this crazy geometry, I don't think that any folding version of a knife that is, like they have a fixed version of this. And fixed blades in general, those are always better options if you're going to be doing absolutely, I don't care what knife it is, what lock it is, a fixed blade is always a better tool for doing things like batoning or chopping or real crazy heavy duty use. But as this, we are such a weird community of people, like folding knife people. We just love when folding knives are pushed way beyond what they should be limited to, right? Obviously, a folding knife should not be put in an environment where you are fully dependent on it. But we're fascinated with the idea that it's possible. So when stuff like this comes out, we're like, oh, can it? And like a bunch of us really want to see it succeed, and a ton of people really want to see it fail. I think, honestly, it doesn't really matter what we do. Like, a fixed blade's always going to be a better option. But you can make this substantially more durable by going, the direction of kind of what the triad lock relies on, which is not a liner that's weak at the relief cut. Essentially, what you need is, number one, there's a couple of options here. Number one, you need a way to completely disengage the liner and move it over here so that there's no pressure on it, right? That liner should basically just be used in a situation where you're like, I'm just going to open this up and, I'm just going to quickly open an Amazon package with it. I think I've seen Melissa Backwoods like jokingly open up a package with the one that she has. And that's funny. Yeah, sure. But if you're actually going to take this out and use it, which again, there's always a better tool for the job. There should be a way to completely disengage this liner so it's not being used. Then you're completely relying on the pivot and the secondary pin. But furthermore, there should be another pin. I honestly believe that completely. I've seen some of these knives that have a hole down here. They either put them right here or they put them right here. Another pin just means it's locked out and stabilized that much better. So that would be one way to do it without changing this knife at all. Just a way to keep this over, to keep it totally out of the way. I don't know how they do it. That'd be a little tricky, right? And then just another pin right here. Or another pin that, when engaged, takes all of the potential pressure off of the liner lock. This is the problem. on knives like this. As soon as you start banging on the spine, it goes right into here, right? Doesn't matter what material you use, it's just not a robust piece of material. What I think is even a better idea would be to design basically an absolutely massive crossbar lock for something like this, right? Ideally with like a coil spring to keep it engaged and not omega springs. But that coupled with a secondary pin means you have a huge, at least, this pivot's got to be at least 1/4 inch, right? This absolutely massive secondary pin. You have 2 huge blade stops, mitigating pressure away from the pivot on either side of these huge liners. And then locking the blade, you have an enormous crossbar lock. Something about the width of this. I think at that point, you might actually, I wouldn't say like you could depend on this tool and only this tool to baton absolutely massive logs in half for a decade. But could you do some light camp work with it? Yeah, I think maybe so. I think still though, the issue that people are going to have down the road actually using something like this, right, is that the main benefit of a folding knife is that it folds. So the biggest argument that anybody could make about this over just like a fixed blade is, well, but it folds. So I get all this blade, but then it's much more compact and easy to carry. We're at a size of knife where that argument in and of itself is out the window. So we're so far beyond the argument of practicality here. We are specifically in the zone of how could we hypothetically make this work? Let's set aside the fact that it's already hilariously uneconomical. It's so absurdly expensive. Like there is no argument to make this work. But if we're just going to ignore all of that and say, how could you make this kind of work? You can't, I'm convinced you just can't do the liner lock. You got to have multiple pins in there. You have to have as much as you, because what's going to happen, what I started to say was, all of these impacts and slams and things like that, it's all making its way to the frame, right? And the frame, once the frame warps or bends or cracks, then you're screwed. So you have to mitigate as much of that as possible. And these impacts, if they're going into multiple pins, right, you're breaking up all that damage. Some of it's always going to make it to the frame, right? But you're kind of reducing that, like, bam, and then it's kind of reducing that damage and splitting it up in multiple zones. Then you increase the life of this tool. And assuming you use it in a way that's not, Conan the Barbarian style, I think it might actually kind of hold up, right? So we definitely won't stop seeing these huge overbuilt knives with these secondary locking pins, right? First time I ever saw it was Crusader Forge. It used to be Trident knives, like the old FIFP. Yeah, they used to do this too, right? A long time. That was the earliest version of this I ever saw. I'm sure there's much older versions, right? Chopping, I think you'll be fine. If they were really to actually design a folding knife that was meant to baton, it's got to be similar to the Triad lock, which does essentially that. It is, all of the impact is being pushed away, as far away as it can from the frame. I think Dutch Bushcraft Boys did it with at least the 8010, probably a bunch of other Triad lock knives, right? And I'm not talking like a little tap, because people always tell me, the Benchmade bug out, you can baton with that. Yeah, but all the videos are just a tap, 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 and it's like a stick, or like, at best it's like a thin log, and they're just tap, tap. I mean, like that. If we're talking about like really, like the way that you would do it with a fixed blade, I think that's what you'd have to do. Do we need that? No. Is it going to be reduced to a price that's going to be, basically something that the average person would acquire and make use of? No, absolutely not. You are 100% of the time better off with a fixed blade. But this is interesting, and it does make me curious. It does. It makes me excited to see what Midgards Mesa will come out with in the future, because they're always doing weird things with knives. I mean, the carbine rifle knife, for example, has that huge, like, sliding cylinder thing, right? Kind of like, it looks like a bolt action rifle. And I don't think that that's like the end all, you know, like it has the secondary pin and it's got a big thick frame lock, but again, it's still dependent. It's still like ultimately the last line of defense is the relief cut, which that's not gonna cut it, right? So there needs to be a different style of locking system that doesn't depend on something like this. But this is fun. It's interesting. I love seeing folding knives get pushed further and further into the realm of insanity, and Midgards Messer certainly seems to be at the front of this, even if they're not necessarily making incredible progress. This is fun, though. Do I recommend this to anybody? No. But if you love oversized knives, you know what you're getting into, right? You're prepared to pay too much money for what it is, right? And you're just kind of, I want to laugh along with them, right? Then sure, go ahead. But be aware. Do not take this thing out as it is and try to baton with it. Don't do that. Best case scenario, you break the knife. Worst case scenario, you go to the hospital. So I don't recommend that at all. But it is fun, and I'm really glad that they gave me the opportunity to check it out. I don't know that there's really anything else that we need to talk about. I think that I'll point out that the blade is so heavy. If your fingers are in the way of this at all, it's coming down. It's coming down on your fingers. There's no blade play on the thing the way that it is, right? And I believe almost certainly it runs on bearings, which just doesn't make any sense. But this is, again, this is a prototype. What differences between this and if they actually do a final version of it, I honestly don't know. But I'll link places where it will pop up if they do a production run of it. If they do, I doubt that they'll do more than like a few of them. They might make 30, 40, they might make 50, right? But this isn't probably going to be a regular product. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I am a professional of nothing. I am a professional observer and handler of knives, right? So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I know you guys love to see stuff like this, and I love to showcase it and give my thoughts anyway. So thanks again to Midgards Messer. Don't stop doing what you're doing. Be exactly who you guys are. You create some of the most fun, ridiculous things in the knife world, and love them or hate them, they are at least providing entertainment. Entertainment like what you're watching right now. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do of course have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.